Hello YouTube, we got Jake and Fozzie here again with another how-to. This time we're going to be doing a couple of light switches, show you the proper way to get them done. Obviously, before you start, you want to prep your area, the tools you're going to need, the extra switches that we have, and where you're going to be working. Alright, so obviously before you start working with anything electrical, you have to turn the power off. This is going to save you a lot of trouble down the road. Because this panel's not marked, we're just going to basically turn the power off to the entire unit, and then we'll get started. Alright, so we had one of our residents complaining that his switch just wasn't turning the lights on or off. So with any sort of switch installation, step one is going to be removing the faceplates. Now that we have the power off, you don't have to worry too much about any shocks. You're going to want to pop the faceplate off. There's going to be a second set of screws inside. This is what actually holds the switch in place. After removing these two screws, you're going to want to pull it out so that all the wires are exposed. Alright, so as you can see with this switch, they used the plug holes in the back. I would never recommend doing this for a couple of reasons. For one, the connections aren't as good as it could be if you had it wrapped around here. For two, if the switch has any sort of problems inside, you're not going to be able to get the wires out to swap it out for another one. This is why we keep all of our tools close at hand, so you can come, snipper the old one, you're good to go. Now you may notice that both these wires are the same color. When you have a switch wired up, you actually only put the positive leads on either end of the switch. Basically, you just either make the connection or break the connection, and that's how you turn the power on or off. Okay, for some reason this isn't working. There we go. Now, whoever did this one last time, for some reason, decided that it would be a great idea to wrap the ground wire all the way around. We never ask why, but we know it's because they're completely incompetent. So you want to put the bend going the same way you're going to be turning the screws. That way, as you turn the screws, it will actually make the connections that much tighter. Okay, you get your new switch labeled top up. I mean, this is pretty common sense stuff, but sometimes you gotta say it just to make sure. After you put your bend in there, just gotta tighten everything back up, and you should be good to go. This is why we make the bends facing up. That way, as you turn the screws, they get tighter and tighter. Alright, now we put the ground back on. Hold that in place with your thumb. Tighten the grounding screw. Nice and tight. Give it a good shake. Make sure everything's connected nice and tight inside. And then it's as simple as just pushing it back in the box. And we'd screw it in. Alright. Before you put everything back together, you have to test it. Always test. There's nothing worse than putting it back together and finding out there's still a problem. So we're going to come back in, we're going to turn the power back on, and then we're going to go test the switch. So now that we have the power back on, we're going to come and test the switch. Alright, so we got that problem solved. Alright, so now that you've got the power back on, you've got the switch tested, you know that you're good to go, it's time to put it back in. You want to make sure these wires have plenty of room inside. If you put too much pressure on them, they can pop out. Because we wrapped them around the pins, you don't have to worry about that on the switch's end, but where they're wire nutted in or where they come out of the wall, you want to make sure you get those connections nice and tight. So coil them, whatever you have to do, just don't put too much pressure on them. Now, as you took it apart, you can tell there's holes. You can see exactly where things go. Put it back together in the same way you took it apart. I never like to tighten anything down all the way until I get them both in. threaded real nice, and then before I put them all the way in, now that we've got them both, I'd say about 3/4 of the way threaded, I'll go back, do the top one, do the bottom one. Again, never too tight. These are very delicate pieces. If you put these screws in too tight, you can actually break the whole thing. And time to put the cover back up. There you go. Brand new switch, replaced, tested, ready to go. Now, just for fun, we're going to show you from start to finish just one more go through, just so you can get a good idea of how it's done. All right. Since this one had obviously 2 switches that were bad, we're going to do another one from start to finish just to show you in one go how it's done. Now, this is a dual faceplate. It's exactly the same as the other one. Obviously, there's just 2 in here. So you just pop it out like you would any other faceplate. We've already tested the switches, so we know which one it is. This one's fan controlled, this one's for the lights. Just like with the other one, you pull out the screws that hold it into place. You don't need to pull them out all the way. It's actually a lot easier if you don't. That way they'll stay attached to the switch itself. It'll make cleanup a lot easier. It's also the same reason I did it with the faceplates. I could unscrew them completely and pull the screws out, but it just makes it that much harder when I have to go and put it back in. This one, with the way it's wired, of course, big bundle right in front. Alright, as you can see, this has a whole mess of wires done up behind it. And because, again, they plugged it into the back instead of screwing it around the screws, this thing is not coming out. So, after we cut away the wires that we don't need, we have to unthread this through this bundle here, just so we can get out something to work with. This is why you want to keep your wires always not only in good shape, but easy to access and work with. Because you might think, oh, I changed the switch, I'm never going to have to do it again. But you know that's not true. Alright. Now, just like with the last one, you make sure you have the orientation for the top up. Pretty self-explanatory with that. You want to make sure you put the wires bent the way you're going to be turning the screws. That way, as you turn them, they go on tighter. It doesn't really matter which one goes on which. As you know, switches are connected to the positive line. That way, it just breaks the connection or makes the connection. So you can put either one on top or bottom. That doesn't matter. It's making sure you have the wires bent in the right direction, the little hooks. All right, screw them back in. Make sure they're nice and tight. Give it a good pull. Look inside to make sure you didn't knock any of those wire nuts loose when you were messing around with this other fool's work. All right, because the grounding screws on the other side, instead of bending it up like we did with the other ones, you bend this one down. That's just the direction the screw goes. So as you twist it, the wire actually wraps tighter around the screw. I do one last pull. All right, you're good to go. Line up the screws, making sure is not to crimp the wires because you don't want to run into the same problem like we had taking these off. Get everything nice and lined up, and then start screwing. All right, like I said, thread about halfway through on top, switch to the bottom, making sure everything's nice and lined up. Go about halfway through on the bottom. That'll make sure that you got it in properly. everything's seated correctly and that you're not going to mess it up by putting one side in too hard. If you put one side in all the way and then try to put the bottom part on and do the same thing, you can actually warp the housing for the switch, and you're going to run into the same problem where the switch either pops out or just doesn't work properly. Now again, before we go any farther, we want to test it before we put it all back together. All right, perfect. All right, so as you can see, we've got everything put back together, tested everything to make sure it works. And that's how it's done. It takes a few minutes if you have the right tools and everything prepped.